Alex to come now and lead us in our scripture reading. And Alex will be reading from Esther chapter 1 and the first 12 verses.
This is what happened during the time of Xerxes, the Xerxes who ruled over 127 provinces stretching from India to Kush. At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa, and in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all of his nobles and officials. The military leaders of Persia and Media, the princes and the nobles of the provinces were present. For a full 180 days, he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. When these days were over, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days in the enclosed garden of the king's palace for all the people, from the least to the greatest, who were in the citadel of Susa. The garden had hangings of white and blue linen, fastened with cords of white linen and purple material to silver rings on marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and other costly stones. Wine was served in goblets of gold, each one different from the other, and the royal wine was abundant. In keeping with the king's liberality, by the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink with no restrictions, for the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man what he wished. Queen Vashti was also given a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. On the 7th day, when King Xerxes was in high spirits from wine, he commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him, Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, to bring before him Queen Vashti, wearing her royal crown, in order to display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at. But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Then the king became furious and burned with anger. This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you very much, Alex. The American pastor John Ortberg, who wrote the book on which our June preaching series is based, tells of a time when he attended a retreat. And one of the topics dealt with at the retreat was how every single human being, every one of us, is created by God for a mission. Everybody needs a purpose, a calling. Our lives require a mission that is larger than ourselves. And God has made us to be fired up and to be motivated by this mission to celebrate our purpose and to live into it. And maybe you just want to get in touch with that within your own being, which is fired up and motivated by a mission which is bigger than yourself. The speaker at the retreat that John was attending went on to say something else. He said that if we don't embrace our true mission, then we all have a shadow mission. And this shadow mission is one which we are all tempted to live into. That when we live into our shadow missions, when we let our life center around something unworthy, around something dark, around something selfish, then we will miss God's purpose for our lives. And Ortberg describes how one of the men at the retreat spoke up at that point, and with great courage and with great vulnerability, he described his shadow mission. He said that his shadow mission is to watch TV and to indulge himself sexually while the world goes to hell. And Ortberg describes how the room grew quiet So quiet that you could see every man there thinking how easily a life can deteriorate into the pursuit of an unworthy purpose, in the pursuit of a shadow mission. And so today we start a series in which we're looking at how you can live how you can find out what God's mission is for you, and also how you can avoid your shadow mission. And here's how we're going to do this. Throughout all of the Sundays of June, we're going to do a kind of character study of 4 of the main characters in the Old Testament book of Esther. Each one of these 4 characters must choose between their mission and their shadow mission. And as we will see in this ancient story, entire destinies are formed. Indeed, the history of an entire nation hangs on the decisions that key characters in the book of Esther will make. So let's dive straight into the story. There's a map on the screen, or there will be in a minute, and this shows us how the book of Esther is set in Susa, right in the middle of the screen there, which is the capital of the Persian Empire, which is that entire empire which is in orange. And that King Xerxes rules over this entire empire. Now, I want you to just get a sense of the vastness of the empire that Xerxes rules over. This area includes the modern-day countries of Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Turkey, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. Kush the Kush referred to in the reading is in fact the Nile area. So all the way from the Indian subcontinent right across to the Nile area, right down to Ethiopia. By any standards, this is a massive kingdom. Xerxes is a powerful man. And within the first chapter, we discover something of how Xerxes lives with his power. We discover, firstly, that Xerxes is a man who is used to getting his own way. Did you notice that? Notice his response to Queen Vashti's defiance of him. He became furious and he burned with anger. We also discover that Xerxes is a man who is preoccupied, obsessed even, with showing his greatness. Maybe it's his way of bolstering a fragile ego. I don't know. But we read that for a full 180 days, that's 6 months, for a full 6 months, Xerxes displays the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and the glory of his majesty. Humility is not the word that springs to mind when we think of Xerxes. Throughout this book, we also see that Xerxes is a man who is easily influenced by the advice of others. When he has important decisions to make, he consults his advisors, which is not in itself a bad thing, but that he seems to be led astray by poor advice. He seems to lack wisdom and a strength of character which will enable him to make the right decisions with great boldness. So here is Xerxes' shadow mission. Xerxes' shadow mission is to look impressive and to experience pleasure while following the path of least resistance. To look impressive, that's showing off his kingdom. To experience pleasure, the great big parties he throws, whilst he follows the path of least resistance. And the details of the party are quite impressive. We are told in great detail about the decor, about the goblets of gold, each one uniquely handcrafted, how each guest was allowed to drink as much as they like, which broke with precedent for such parties. Everything Xerxes lays on seems to have one goal. And the goal is for people to say, hey, Xerxes, you're the man. You're the man. It seems that is something of what Xerxes' shadow mission is. Now, if we start with our opening statement that God has created every human being for a true mission, then let's just imagine what Xerxes' true mission might be. His true mission, indeed, the mission of every king or every president or every ruler, it should have been to to do justice, to serve the interests of the people of his kingdom. It should have been to protect the vulnerable, to care for the orphans, to ensure that the people of his kingdom and even surrounding kingdoms, that they flourish. But here is a man who is driven by his shadow mission. And his shadow mission is the difference between the king he should have been and the king he was. The poet and author T.S. Eliot, at a time of great despair in his life, he wrote a haunting poem that describes the world of shadow missions. He wrote, "We are the hollow men in the twilight kingdom. This is the dead land. Between the idea and the reality falls the shadow. Between the essence and the descent falls the shadow. In between the person you could be and the person you are, in between the world as it ought to be and the world as it is, falls the shadow." And T.S. Eliot's poem ends with words that may be familiar to you. It ends with these words. It says, "This is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper." You see, it's when we are controlled by our shadow mission that our marriage, that our nation, that our family, that our church, that our career ends not with a bang, but with a whimper. So back to King Xerxes. Queen Vashti, she throws a banquet of her own. It's just for women. And it's interesting to read that there are no excesses. There's none of this juvenile showing off. It's an interesting contrast between husband and wife. And then we read that on the seventh day, the king was merry with wine, which seems not to have been that unusual for King Xerxes. And in his drunken state, he sends for Queen Vashti. The king has been showing off all his stuff to his people. Now he wants to show off his trophy wife. And he is using her in a way that women are so often used in our society, isn't he? And this is what usually happens. This is what usually happens when we live into our shadow missions. We end up using the people around us, sometimes even the people we care about. We use them to serve the interests of our shadow mission. It's a moment of great humiliation for Vashti, as King Xerxes wants to bring her out to show a bunch of drunken men her beauty. And then comes this amazing moment in the story. We read that when the king's attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Somebody has the courage to say no to the king. Come and parade myself before a crazed mob of drunken men? I think not, says Vashti. It's interesting that the first hero in the story is a wife who refuses to submit to her husband. And right here, this raises an interesting idea. It raises the idea that marriages, like individuals, also have a true mission and also have a shadow mission. That in a healthy marriage, as in any healthy relationship for that matter, that marriage is a great place to be transformed into Christ-likeness. You know, I know that in my marriage, and I think I might have shared this last week, in fact, or last time I preached rather, that Holly knows me better than anybody else. Holly knows me better than I know myself. But because I know that she loves me, she is the one who is able to speak truth into my life in a way that I'm able to receive, in a way that I'm able to hear. And so I believe that Holly, probably more than any other individual in the world, is able to be used by God to transform me into Christ-likeness and to make me a better person. And that's the true mission of every marriage, of every long-term relationship, that we help each other to become the people that God created us to become better people. That's not always an easy process, let me say. And when a marriage lives into its true mission, there will be moments of conflict. There will be moments of difficult conversations. But as we push through them, we help each other to become better people. But there is also a shadow mission in many marriages. And the shadow mission in a marriage might be to avoid conflict at all costs. It might be pseudo-intimacy. It might be enabling alcoholism or some other dysfunction. It may be projecting an enviable marriage to outsiders. For the marriage between Xerxes and Vashti, the shadow mission was to always have Xerxes look good. That was the shadow mission of their marriage. And so to those of you who are in a long-term relationship or a marriage, maybe a helpful conversation for you to have this week is just to think about what is the mission of your marriage, of your relationship, and what is the shadow mission in your marriage. So because the shadow mission of Xerxes' relationship with Vashti is that she must always make him look good, Xerxes' response to Vashti's refusal is what our response is for most of us when our shadow mission is challenged. He is very angry. And we read that the king became furious and burned with anger, for Vashti was making him look weak. She was threatening his shadow mission. Now, further on in chapter 1, beyond where Alex read to us, we discover that in his anger, the king turns to his advisors. And his advisors come up with a plan. Vashti is to be deposed as queen, and a search is to be made for the most beautiful virgin in all of Persia, who will become the king's new queen. And this is where the Jewish girl, Esther, the Jews are living in exile in Susa and in Persia, where Esther begins to enter the story. Now, I want to put Xerxes and Esther aside for a minute and Vashti, and I just want to invite you to think about the question of what is your shadow mission? What is your shadow mission? You see, when God created us, He made human beings unlike all of the rest of creation, like God's self. And God gave to human beings their mission. They were to be responsible for every living thing that moves on the face of the earth. And this is the first mission statement in all of history, of biblical history. On the same day that God gave people life, He gave them a mission. And that's why we love great causes. It's why we love to have a purpose. Our mission is to care for all that God has created and to cause it to flourish by stewarding it under God's authority. And then comes Genesis chapter 2. Then comes the shadow mission. The tempter comes and says, eat the forbidden fruit, and you will be just like God. So where our mission is to serve God, our shadow mission is to replace God. And one of the characteristics of our shadow mission, which makes it so dangerous, is that it's usually not 180 degrees from our true mission. But that often our shadow mission is just 5 degrees off course from our true mission. And we can even convince ourselves that our shadow mission is our true mission. But over the course of a lifetime, that 5 degrees makes a big difference. Because your shadow mission will take your desires and your abilities, your hurts, your longings, and twist them just a little bit off track. For very often our true mission also plugs into our desires, our abilities. It uses our past experience of hurts, our longings. Very close to each other. Sometimes the difference is very subtle. Let me give you an example of this. John Ortberg, in my opinion, one of the most gifted preachers I know. Powerful, powerful preacher. He describes that he discovered his 4-word mission statement when he was a 12-year-old boy. He had won an award for speaking at a public speaking contest in the neighboring town. And the local newspaper ran an article on him that had the headline, "Talkative Boy Wins Acclaim." And John Ortberg suggests that the journalist who wrote that headline didn't realize it, but when they wrote that headline, they named his shadow mission. Talkative Boy Wins Acclaim. So I've been grappling with what my own shadow mission might be as I have been working through the material and preparing this message. And it's in some ways similar. It's also about earning others' approval. And I know that without God's grace, without God's help, I could spend my whole life trying to earn that word of affirmation, that word of approval, that word of acknowledgement from the people around me whose opinion matters. But you see, what happens is that as I begin to name my shadow mission, I come to recognize it when it shows itself in me. To recognize the ways in which I subtly try to project myself in ways that will win the approval of others. And I surrender that to God. And God begins to work out his purposes in me. And so it's important that each of us try to just name what our shadow mission might be. And if you don't know what it is, maybe you should ask the people around you. The chances are that they will know. But as we begin to seek out what our shadow mission might be, let me give you some examples just to kind of prime the pump. Maybe your shadow mission is this: I don't care who's in charge as long as it's me. Or how about this one? Busy, busy, busy. Or this one: perfect house, perfect marriage, perfect thighs, perfect kids. Always be in control. Never show weakness. Or keep the peace at all costs. The Bible is full of people who were tempted by their shadow mission. It's a fun exercise to try and identify them. We think of Solomon, whose shadow mission was pleasure. We think of Jonah, whose shadow mission was escape. We think of the Pharisees, whose shadow mission was being holier than anybody else. We think of Pilate, whose shadow mission was avoiding the weight of responsibility. Now, this area of shadow mission is really interesting. I mean, it can apply to marriages and individuals, but it can also apply to churches. Many churches will have a plaque on the wall somewhere with their mission statement, or a banner with their mission statement on it, or it will be printed in the bulletin. But imagine if churches had to print their shadow mission statement on the church bulletin to outshine all the other churches in our neighborhood, or the church where all the cool people hang out, or the church where everything is up and to the right. Important for us to think about what our shadow mission might be. What is our shadow mission for us as South Africans? I was thinking about this in the light of that video clip that went viral on Friday. And maybe the shadow mission that's threatening our country's future right now is this: I will fight for justice for my people, which sounds very noble. But I want to suggest that that's 5 degrees off from our true mission, which is to fight for justice for all people. And the politics of identity, whether it be on the basis of race or tribe, it threatens to divide us as a nation. And as Christians, we're called to lead the way in showing that in Christ there's no us and them, there's only us. And so we are to work to ensure that all people thrive, not just that people of our own tribe or ethnicity or race are the ones that thrive. Here's the good news. The good news is that Jesus knows all about shadow missions because Jesus grappled with his own shadow mission. You see, Jesus' shadow mission was was to be the Messiah without suffering. The biblical scholar F. Bruce writes this. He says, time and again, the temptation came to Jesus from many directions to choose some less costly way of fulfilling that calling than the way of suffering and death. But he resisted it to the end. Jesus grappled. We see throughout the Gospels that Jesus grappled with his shadow mission. Think of him facing the 40 days of temptation in the desert, right at the beginning of his ministry. And what are those temptations? To achieve his mission without hunger, turn these stones into bread. It's to achieve his mission without pain. Throw yourself down from the temple and the angels will bear you up. It's to achieve his mission without opposition. Bow down before me and all the kingdoms of the earth I will give to you. And Jesus says no to his shadow mission. Later on, Jesus tells the disciples that he must suffer and die. And Peter tries to convince him that the suffering isn't necessary. And that's exactly the same shadow mission. And that's why Jesus responds to Peter so harshly. And then right in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus is wrestling with his shadow mission. Father, let this cup of suffering pass from me. His shadow mission is to be the Messiah without the cross. But we know that he said no to that shadow. And he went to the cross. And on the cross he died for all of us who are tempted by our shadow mission. John Ortberg writes about this. He suggests that the significance of the darkness that came over the land from 12 to 3, that it was as if God was using the earth to paint a picture, that in between the incarnation and the resurrection, there falls the shadow. That in between the love of God and the sins of the world falls the shadow. That in between you and me, broken by sin, and our God, falls the shadow on the cross. And that shadow ultimately dies when Jesus is raised, so that we could come to life, to the true mission that God calls us to. You see, here's the thing, friends. You are not going to be able to avoid your shadow mission by trying to avoid your shadow mission. That's never going to work. It's important to name your shadow mission, but if you just try to avoid it, you will fail. The way in which you will avoid your shadow mission is to replace it with something better. To replace it with a new mission, with a more noble mission, with a more compelling mission, with the mission that God has created you for. And so next week we will be exploring the powerful story of Esther. And Alex will be helping us to begin to reflect on what our own mission, what our true mission, what our calling might be. But for that, you're going to have to wait for next Sunday. Let's pray. God, we are speechless in awe and wonder that you have created us in your image. That you have given to each and every one of us a mission, a calling, the ability to make a difference. And Lord, forgive us for the ways in which we have allowed our shadow mission to divert us from the true mission that you have placed upon our lives. And so, Lord, come and shine the light of your wisdom in the shadowy parts of our lives. Give us the courage to go to the difficult places, to have the difficult conversations with others and with you. And as we surrender our shadows to you, let the healing light of your love and your salvation, which flows from Calvary, flood our lives. For we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.